What's up, everybody, and welcome to the Insurrection Inc. podcast. We want to thank you for listening, and we hope you enjoy the show.
Hey guys, Jay here. Just wanted to remind you that we have a Discord. The link will be in the show notes, and we would love if you joined. And while you're in the show notes, check out our brothers at Frat House, where you can find more shows like us.
Welcome back to the Insurrection Inc. podcast. Today we've got me, Porter, here with Jay, Andrew, Stratty, and special guest Sal Mayweather, also known as Sal the Agorist on Twitter and Instagram. How's it going, Sal?
What's up, guys? Thanks for having me.
Thanks for being here.
Let's jump straight into it then. So we wanted to ask you some harder questions, not the normal stuff you get asked. I feel like on every podcast you go on, you get asked like the same 4 questions. It's always, what is agorism? Why do you reject the political process, et cetera, et cetera. So trying to go more in depth today, but got a wide range of questions. So I think first we're going to let Stratty start off by talking about some current events. Something that's been in the news recently. Stratty, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so we have our thoughts on it. All the people in our circles have their separate thoughts on it. We wanted to ask you, what do you think of Chaz? And do you think there are some positives and some negatives to it, or what's up?
I think that everybody is wrong on this one. I think that everybody has got this one wrong. First of all, the people in Chaz are communists, and they're going to find out 2 things the hard way. Number one, they're going to find out that voluntary communes don't work for the exact same reasons that Mises told us, but they'll do it in an accelerated format. So it only took 2 days for them to run out of food because the homeless people came. And that was 1, 2, 3. The second thing they're going to find out is that these approaches don't work. So if they are able to maintain this relative autonomy, eventually they're gonna get Waco'd. They're gonna what they did to Lavoy Finicum is what they're gonna do to these people in Chaz. People are communists. They have no idea what's they're collectivists. I do think that it's like ironic how the right libertarians and the Boogaloo people who are always out there like threatening that they're gonna have this uprising one day. They're gonna have this uprising. They're just waiting for the government to become tyrannical. Now that these people have actually taken the initiative, now they're like, oh well, no, that's not what we were talking about. We're waiting for real tyranny. So I think that like they get it wrong, and at the same time, it's also there's a lot of right libertarians who opportunity for them to sort of they take a very statist line and sort of support the police because the opposition is communist. So they're not consistent, right? So like just because they're communist doesn't mean you can justify NAP violations, So a lot of their principles, the right libertarians, is just like right out the window insofar as Chaz goes.
Yeah, I had a tweet I said, I don't have it in front of me, but the wording was basically, I want to get community technology vibes from this, and instead I'm getting Paris Commune. Is that about where you are?
Exactly. That's exactly where I'm at, actually. You put it probably better than I could have.
All right. That kind of leads into the next question.
So I've heard you on a lot of podcasts talk about the concept of anarcho-Zionism, and I was wondering, like, obviously for the listeners to find it, because it's not something that a lot of people are familiar with. I thought I had, like, with my old backup on Instagram, I had named it anarcho-Zionism as a joke, like playing up the actual Zionism part. I didn't realize it was something Konkin actually wrote about. But where does the line get drawn between libertarians voluntarily associating with each other and anarcho-Zionism?
The idea is that they can create a sort of libertarian state, right? Like state project or seasteading or private cities, things like that. It's one thing if everybody just happens to live in the same neighborhood, right? If everybody just moves to New Hampshire, then that's fine. But if the point of moving to New Hampshire is to elect a libertarian governor and a libertarian assembly, that doesn't make any sense. So I guess it really comes down to the line is always at voluntarism. As long as there's no state involved, then it's consistent with the counter-economic approach. It's really just because it's such a logical contradiction, right? A libertarian state, like that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. So it's the strategical error is shown in the whole logic of it.
I definitely, I do agree with that.
Konkin said it the best because what he said was that these projects, they rely on the moral restraint of politicians. Like, we've seen what happens here, and I've gotten into this with the secessionists, right? They want to secede and form smaller states. Well, we've seen where that gets us, right? Strategically, number one, it's a disaster because you just get genocided by the stronger government. Number one, the stronger state always just kills everybody. And they've shown a willingness to massacre 1 million Americans to keep their monopoly on violence. So strategically, it's a disaster, but also theoretically, it's still socialism, right? Okay, so it's better that you have a smaller state, but it's still a state. And I don't want to listen to anybody. I don't care if it's the manager of the seastead or the governor of New Hampshire. I don't want any master. You know what I mean?
Yeah, of course. No, and it definitely is a little bit of a contradiction for people who claim to be anti-political to want to jump into the political realm.
No, I think and I also think it's contradictory for libertarians to want to be political.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We're supposed to be anti-political. At least that's what, in agorism, that's what we like to consider, counter-economics, anti-politics. So
you touched on the secession one already, but you had some other tweets recently that got some of the more right-leaning libertarians, the more right-wing ones, up in arms. And one of them, I want you to clarify your thoughts a little bit. It was, you said culture and tradition are tools of the state. And then you referenced a part from Anatomy of the State by Rothbard. And I wanted to ask, do you think that they're inherently tools of the state, or that just how they're used now and have historically been used, they're often co-opted by the state? Do you think they're inherently bad, or what do you think?
I don't think that they're inherently bad. I think that we naturally have culture, but I think that the state uses that against us. Regardless of if there's a state or not, you have ancestors and they have traditions, and if there's no state, you probably still celebrate Christmas and Easter or whatever, Hanukkah, whatever holidays you celebrate. But the point is that the state turns those things against us. It becomes, your father's fought for this flag, so you have to fight for this flag. And my dad fought in Vietnam and his dad fought in World War II, so I have to fight in Iraq. And it becomes this whole excuse that the state uses to convince people of their legitimacy. I think that far too often there's right libertarians all the time who are see, culture matters, cultural Marxism, all of this crap. And it's it matters to the individual, but once we start to let it influence us to behave in a collectivist manner, then it becomes a bad thing. To say we have to defend the culture against these people, so let's pass a law, or we should ban flag burning, things like that, that come from tradition and culture, all these laws. And I don't know, I just find it to be a very convenient path for the state to manipulate people. And I think that if we took it not as seriously, then we would sort of neutralize that threat a little bit. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. And I'm friends with some Hoppians who got up in arms about that tweet. And
Right.
and my response to them was, would you not say we have a culture of militarism in the United States and a tradition of democracy? Because they hate those things. And that
Exactly.
did that did kind of open their eyes. But I think that's a perfectly nuanced response. Yeah.
To be fair, I think that a lot of the collectivism, the collectivist policies, they affect culture, right? So the low time preferences that get induced by central banking, because the bank's always printing money, people are induced to sort of have a low time preference and spend money quickly. That does create a sort of a relative degeneracy, and Hop showed how that plays out. And Saifuddin Moose has talked about this a little bit. It's one of the only things I think he's right about, but that is true. I think that it does have a cultural effect. I don't think that we should let it. That's no excuse to become statist or collectivist in any way.
Yeah, although Jay, correct me if I'm wrong. Would that be high time preference or the right? Yeah.
This one always fucking trips me up. High time. The terminology of high time preference versus low time preferences. It's very messy.
Low time preference are the folks who prefer to spend and consume like immediately, and high time preference are the folks who can wait longer.
I always get them mixed up.
Yeah, I'm actually
I
not sure.
only remember it because I got into like a Twitter fight like a day or two ago about it. So I had to like, check.
Okay, yeah. Oh, it makes
Go
sense.
with you then. Yeah.
Yeah. Whatever. It's just one of those things.
All right. Now we're going to get into some of Rothbard's criticisms of Konkin because I think this is good stuff. And honestly, I'm not sure where I fall in some of his criticisms and some of the responses from Konkin. But one was that counter economics really only applied to what Rothbard called marginalia, which is, he said that goods that are easy to conceal and transport and are individually highly valuable, like precious metals and drugs, for instance, things like that. He said there couldn't be black or gray markets in concrete, steel, large-scale economic projects, stuff like that. I think this is where the common phrase that you hear sometimes comes from, where people say counter economics is good, but it's not enough on its own. Where would you say that type of reasoning goes wrong?
Well, number one, Bitcoin sort of disproves that, right? This enormous economic and monetary infrastructure that's been created by the white paper, and it's only growing every day. Like once tokenization becomes fully developed, we'll have a whole securities market structured around this. So that in and of itself, the existence of cryptocurrency disproves that. But the more it's like things like concrete and stuff like that, we see black and gray markets for that all over the place. I mean, that's like one of the main, specifically, concrete and cement is like one of the old school mob industries with like garbage and dumpsters. Like all of these industries were riddled with crime because they were cartelized. So the government would cartelize them, and then these enormous gray markets or black markets would pop up. I think in and of itself, the existence of Bitcoin proves that we don't, it's not really confined to things like drugs and guns, things like that. Also, 3D printers are pretty mainstream. It's not just own 3D printers for guns. So they're buying a 3D printer for a whole host of reasons. Like if the ATF comes to your house, I don't have a 3D printer to FGC 9s. I have a 3D printer to make trinkets, I do think it's more mainstream than Rothbard led on. I think he had a very very constrained view of counter economics. I think he was probably coming from like an old school, like New York, like in the 40s kind of vibe where, it was like, very like violent Meyer Lansky type of criminals. I don't think he really understood what Konkin was getting at. That was the fundamental problem I think Rothbard had, is that he really didn't understand the consistency of it.
I do kind of get that sense when I'm reading into the constrained. Yeah.
He also, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, the other thing he said, not to jump the question here, but the other critique he had was that it didn't apply to everybody, right? It only applied to like not everybody. If people work 9 to 5, how can they engage in counter economics if they're working like a corporate job? But he didn't understand how, do both things at once, right? You could work a corporate job, and that just gives you access to whatever market you're in. You know what I mean? Whatever you're into now, whatever your job is, your profession, your hobbies, you already have your one foot in the door. So you're already able to disrupt whatever interference the state has in that sector. I don't know if that makes any sense or not.
I think it does.
Yeah.
And I would also add to that that now with the advent of the internet, especially, and like you said, Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies, the ability to become your own entrepreneur, just like from the comfort of your house, start your own business and run it entirely online and make a living without working a corporate job. That's much easier now than it ever has been before. And that opens it up to more and more people. And when you are an entrepreneur, you own your own business, it's easier to engage in counter economics, avoid taxes, avoid regulations, stuff like that.
that's even true of like the more brick and mortar businesses. You know,
Yeah.
like you can buy a concrete company and not even ever touch a concrete now. You can just do it right over the internet. You know.
Mm-hmm.
That's true.
You mind
yeah.
if I piggyback on this question and address? Have you addressed Rothbard's other critique about agorism?
Oh, okay, I know what you're talking about. Yeah,
yeah.
go ahead and ask this.
Yeah, so the one that always confused me when I tried to understand it is Rothbard's critique that the black and gray markets prolong the life of the state that you're trying to reduce with it. And he gives the example of the USSR. And I just really, for the life of me, don't fully understand what he's getting at with that one.
Yeah, me neither. Especially in the case of the USSR, because that's counter economics is what took down the USSR, right? It was Nalevo was the concept, is what they called the black market, right? Like,
Well,
even when the Soviet Union fell, like all the guns and the arms flooded the black and gray markets, and that wound up in gun-free zones.
Yeah, especially since it's the opening of white markets in countries like the USSR and currently in China that prolongs the life of them, because they would have collapsed on their own if they didn't start introducing more markets on a national level for their own countries.
True, and the other thing too is if you think about it, the only true anarchic market is a black or gray market. The only true free market exists. So to say that somehow furthers the cause of statism, that doesn't seem to make any sense to me. Another good example would be like Gandhi in India, what he did with the salt tax. Right? There's like, doesn't really make any sense how a black or gray market could be beneficial for politicians.
Yeah, it's a little odd.
Well, and one more point to make about the counter economics and the Soviet Union thing, because I actually did a project about this in high school. In the 80s, with like VHSs and records, they would make bootleg copies of them and sell them on their counter economic markets, whatever. And this did that's why this is why I disagree with Rothbard's thing, because culturally that did so much for the people over there. It made them start to go against their oppression they were facing. So that's why I disagree with what Rothbard said.
Even with like things like jeans and like Coca-Cola and like just basic Western products that would slowly infiltrate. I got a friend from Poland there during the dark days, and he would say like he would die to get American movies in. So they did, like everybody would crowd around and come over and watch these American movies, and again, like you said, sort of like the slow creep, of Westernization.
Yeah,
that
actually does a lot.
That plays into a question I had listed for later, but I'm going to go ahead and ask it now since we're kind of on the topic. That's to what extent does public opinion matter to agorists? Like, is working to change public opinion an agorist activity, even if it isn't strictly counter-economic?
Matters zero. It really, if the whole world is communist, it has no bearing on us whatsoever. That's the beauty. That's the beauty of it, right? So, regardless of what Nancy Pelosi or Chuck Schumer or Mitch McConnell, regardless of whatever dictates they can dream up, it doesn't affect us. That's because agorism is like instantaneous liberation. As soon as you've accepted counter economics, you are individually free, right? It's all about the individual, and individual sovereignty and or individual autonomy. As soon as you accept counter economics, you are free, right? We don't acknowledge gun laws, so who cares what Chuck Schumer says? We acknowledge tax laws, so who gives a shit about the IRS? As public opinion, if they, tomorrow they all decide that they want to raise taxes to 100%, fine, I don't care. It makes no difference to me. I mean, they could print all the money in the world. I don't care because I don't pay the inflation tax. Whatever public opinion is, like, it's irrelevant as far as we're concerned. The other thing too is economics always wins, right? You can't fight the market. You don't beat the market. Eventually, freedom and liberty will always win. We've seen that with like pot, right? It was all illegal, and then eventually, so many people were disobeying that law that they had no choice but to sort of make it legal. And then one state did it, two states did it. Before you know it, the whole country did it. Next thing, it'll be the federal government. So that's really that's how counter economics works. You know what I mean? So.
Yeah, that always reminds me. I've said this on Twitter before. I think you saw it because you liked my reply to somebody. But it always reminds me of this article actually by Kevin Carson that I've mentioned before, the mutualist. And he's describing what he thinks. He calls it, of course, the post-capitalist society. But he's talking about like the transition to a stateless society and what it'll look like. And he said that it'll mostly be a ratification after the fact of cumulative changes that have already taken place. And I think that's what we've seen with, like you're saying, the pot laws. Like they finally realized they couldn't stop it, and then the politics of it changed after everyone was already using pot anyway, because they could get it so easily, because so many entrepreneurs were making and selling it. You know.
And no, for sure. Also, Konkin lays out in New Libertarian Manifesto how the Agorist revolution is going to occur. So we know, and I think that he's basically generally right, how, eventually there's going to be this like showdown between private defense agencies and like a collapsing state. Eventually the market will become on par with the state. So we know how that's going to play out.
All right. Speaking of Konkin again, and his like end goal, his view of the Agora included no wage labor. Basically, he talks about the worker capitalist entrepreneur. Uses those three words to describe, like as adjectives to describe what he envisions every individual will be like. But then other economists, such as Per Bylund, who calls himself an agorist, he literally wrote the book on firm theory and why firms exist. So do you have to be against firm organization, or you think that it won't exist in order to be an agorist, or is there a more nuanced way of looking at that?
I definitely think there's going to be a firm. I think there's definitely going to be firms. I think that Konkin's point. So there's a few things. Number one, Konkin didn't like the term capitalist because he conflated it with crony capitalism, which, as far as I'm concerned, is a branch of socialism. A lot of agorists don't like the term capitalist because they use it to refer to crony capitalism. That's why I think Konkin didn't like the term. Insofar as like wage labor, and I call it wage slavery because that's what it is. I think it's a form of slavery. Slave had in antebellum South, a slave would have all of his production taken from him. That's exactly what the government does with income tax, right? They just decide how much of it you're going to get to keep. So it's slavery. That's exactly what a wage earner is a slave, and an entrepreneur is basically free, right? I think that's what Konkin's overall point was. That doesn't mean though that there's not going to be firms and wage workers and stuff like that in an agora. I just think there's going to be a lot less of it, if that makes any sense. If everybody is empowered without the state, let's put it like this: in the absence of the state, there will be a lot more economic opportunities available for people to move away from that sort of labor.
Yeah, that makes sense. And Per Bylund actually talked about that a little bit when he was on our show a few episodes ago.
Right. Yeah, I listened to that episode, and I think he sort of hit the nail on the head. I said I don't think it's that we're not necessarily opposed to it. It's just that we think that in a free market there will be enough opportunities so that people don't have to resort to that sort of less of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And that's in a free market you would definitely see more forms of employment, even down to something like worker co-ops like the mutualists would want, which is a smooth transition into a question I had about when you're dealing with, if we get to abolish the state and we get to a point where now the property has to be divvied up because this was something that was illegitimately owned by a violent organization, and the question arises, well, who owns it now? Who does it belong to? And in the Ethics of Liberty, Rothbard touches on something that comes off a lot with what Kevin Carson agrees with, that it would sort of form into, worker co-ops in this, or quasi-worker co-ops, where the people who actually put in the labor are the ones who own it, and then from there, a private property order arises. Do you agree with that, or how do you think public property would fall into the hands of private citizens?
Konkin has 2 articles that he lays this out in called we just published them on the New Libertarian like a week or 2 ago, called "The Bread Is Mine," part 2, and basically, and I think he hits the nail on the head as usual. Well, like you said, everything that they have is stolen. So the question becomes, we do now, right? What if somebody wants to get paid back? What happens? The proper answer is that there will be private, insurance companies, arbitration, courts, stuff like that. They're going to meet all of this stuff out. Now, insofar as like politicians and cops and stuff who have all this stolen property, is that the people who have been stolen from get paid back. So it all has to be divvied up, and if cops or politicians are unable to pay, then they have to go to a restitution-based work camp, and then here they can work off their debt. And this, of course, these will be run by entrepreneurs and stuff like that. And the best part is there's no violence necessary, right? So society, they're going to be obligated to pay back whatever they owe, and pay back. The only choice is to work it off. People like Chuck Schumer's been robbing people for 50 years, so he's probably going to be in camp for a long time. But the guy who just joined the force 3 months ago, he could probably pay back what he owes in less than a year. So I think it's not necessarily like people say, oh, the Agorist gulags, and it's like, yeah, but for politicians, like career politicians only, or these conquerors on the boards of Northrop Grumman, and these generals who have made a career out of mass murder. Those are the people that are going to spend lifetimes in these these restitution-based camps. But it all comes down to retribution, restoration is really, I guess it would be a better term. But Rothbard, who wrote it? There's a guy called K.G. Armstrong who Rothbard quoted, and this guy wrote an article. It's really hard to find, but if you find it, it's such a great read. It's called "The Retributivist Strikes Back," and I think it's basically been scrubbed off the internet. But Rothbard quoted this guy. I ended up reading it, and I was like, wow, that's exactly it. And the whole idea is that going to be consistent with the non-aggression principle, then you can't initiate violence on somebody. So you can't, somebody steals a $50 bill from you, they owe you $50 interest for whatever losses you may have occurred, plus the cost of collecting that $50. So if you had to pay somebody to go get the $50, they owe you that cost as well. Any punishment past that, though, is a violation of the non-aggression principle. So if you say, all right, well, you took $50 from me, and I $2 interest and $5 recovery. You owe me $57, but you know what? You have to pay me $100. So this way, you learn your lesson. Now you've committed the NAP violation, right? So now you owe. Now you're the person who owes. I think that most libertarians and their punishment theories get that wrong. Well, most of them include deterrence punishment. I think that's a NAP violation.
Yeah, especially with the principle of, we're going to set a high punishment for certain things to deter that. That really doesn't hold up, because a punishment has to be proportional to the crime that was committed.
Exactly.
So, you can say deterrence. Well, you stole candy bars, so we're going to chop off your hands, but that's not proportional. That's a violation of the NAP also.
Exactly right. I think the one case where it gets a little hairy would be obviously in a case of like murder or homicide or something. Mm-hmm. And I think that there is a little bit of evidence to suggest that Sam supported deterrence for murder, but I think that that's a little bit different, because your life is objectively valued by you and you alone, right? So you get to decide what, if somebody killed you, you get to decide what your life is worth. So if you say, oh, well, if somebody killed you and they get killed back, I think that's consistent with the non-aggression principle.
Yeah, especially when you keep in mind that, if you have the chance to kill someone who's trying to kill you, it's perfectly justified. So
exactly, yeah. Right, good point.
Yeah, it does flow pretty well. But
I'd also add one more thing to that is that the excessive punishment thing, like for deterrence purposes, is a collectivist notion because it kind of implies that criminals owe some kind of debt to society, like where they have to pay they have to pay back. Whereas that is completely inconsistent with libertarianism. You only owe a debt to your victims if you're a criminal. There's no such thing as a debt to society at large.
Right, yeah, exactly. And like I said, a lot of libertarians and ANCAPs, minarchists, constitutionalists really get this one completely wrong.
Yeah. It definitely is something that it should be clear to libertarians, especially in like recent times. Like, it is clear that a punitive system and a deterrent system just doesn't work, and it's time to look towards retributive systems.
And like the proof is in the pudding. Look at the prison industrial complex that we have, and I mean, come on, Ross Ulbricht, talk about deterrence punishment gone wrong. I mean, double life plus 40 for creating a website, and that's supposed to discourage people. Meanwhile, there's how many dozens of dark web markets out there today, right now, that we could all go on and buy stuff. But it just goes to show it's a case example of what a disaster deterrence punishment can be. Yeah,
it's shaky grounds.
Concentrate all of that power into one people's hands is, never a good idea.
No, and that's also why, like, when you get into talk of like anarchist philosophy, even then, like in an anarchist society, the death penalty is still a little shaky. I have my sympathies to it, like I said earlier, but it's still very muddy water for that. But. Right.
Well, I think if you can see, I mean, in chaos theory, Bob Murphy sort of lays out how a lot of this would work, and I think if you agreed to an insurance policy, if one insurance company would come to an agreement with another insurance policy over how to adjudicate matters. Your insurance company said, well, we're going to give you a discount if you agree to the death penalty. If you kill Bob, then you'll be shot too. Oh, well, I'm not going to kill Bob, and I get a nice discount on my premium, so sure. And then one day, whatever, you kill Bob, then you've agreed to it. So, you can't change your mind now.
Yeah, that definitely does. That definitely does hold up. God bless Bob Murphy.
Right.
But so to move away from that sort of thing and move more into the cryptosphere, this one comes from a friend of mine. He is a very big Monero guy, and he wants to know what you think of, privacy coins, Monero in specific, and if you think that Bitcoin's reducing block size could be sustainable versus Monero's tail emission system that they have in place.
First of all, I love Monero. I love all privacy coins because I think that that's the future. I think that governments, there's no way that they're going to let cryptocurrencies steal their monopoly on currency. It's not going to happen. They're going to do genocide us before they let that happen. So I think privacy coins are sort of our way around that, right? That's our sort of security feature. I wrote an article a while back about this, about how India and China and the U.S. are sort of beginning to become more and more strict. The Trump administration, it just came out a couple of days ago, he told Mnuchin to go after Bitcoin. The Indian Parliament was voting against currencies, and China has put restrictions on miners and all sorts of crap, really. I think that as these monolithic states sort of clamp down, you're going to see a flood out of pseudonymous chains into more private anonymous chains like Monero, Zcash, and things like that. And there's also a lot of third-gen blockchains out there that are really exciting stuff. Apollo, Cardano, things like that. Now, insofar as specific technical details, I'm not like a cryptographer. I'm not really the right guy to ask about all that stuff. But I don't think that Bitcoin's small block size is going to hold up. It's just not scalable. No way you can become a global currency with those little blocks. And I'm not confident that Lightning Network is going to be the answer to that question. I hope it does work. I really do. No one wants Bitcoin to work more than me, but the maximalists get mad at me because I just don't think that Lightning Network is going to work. It's unrealistic to expect people to open up channels and put money into all these different channels, and it's just not realistic. It's not how normal everyday commerce works. So for that reason, I've supported bigger block solutions. Well, even still, though, that to a certain extent, we're just kicking the can down the road, and eventually, as the network becomes more used, it'll become more congested, and even those bigger blocks will have to address that eventually one day. Who knows? But Monero, I think, is Monero, Cash. I like Dash, although not enough people use the private send feature. All those privacy coins, I think that's where the money's at. Also, tokens. John McAfee's spoken a lot about medical tokens and things like that. So any chain that really is scalable and it also is private and it has a good platform for tokenization, those are really the three of the main things that I'm looking for, like in any cryptocurrency, really. Yeah,
no, I definitely agree with that. And that's one of the reasons why I like Monero a lot, not just for the privacy, but how they've tackled the block size issue, where the blockchain itself is scalable. Because a lot of those things with Bitcoin, it's that, like, I think it was Donnie Gebert said that Bitcoin was the prototype, the 1.0.
Right.
And there's just too many, flaws that are built into it because it was the first one to come around. And people put in all this time and effort to try and put band-aids on it, like Lightning Network and, the mixers and tumblers and all that. But there are better alternatives right now that are rising, and even better alternatives are going to come after that, because that's just the way the market works.
No doubt. I like to think of it like the cars, like a Model T. Model T was like, can you imagine when it first came out? Everyone's like, oh man, there's like a car now. Wow, that's crazy, like a motor and four wheels and like a bench. Actually, over time, like now we have like Teslas and stuff. So like to expect that only the Model T is going to be the only car that anyone ever needs, and we can just keep making it better and working on it, like, that doesn't make any sense to me.
No, not at all. It definitely is. Like, people, there was a phrase I found for it. It's like the inverse of a recency bias, like an establishment bias towards certain things. Like, it was the first that came around, so it must be the best. And it's definitely a little absurd. The maximalists are mind-numbing sometimes.
The thing is, too, like, back in the day, like, we used to get excited when there was like a new project that came out. Like, so like, we were all, before like there was any like split or was any controversy, like everybody used Bitcoin. But if there was like a new project, like everyone's like, oh, that's awesome, that's so cool, like tell me more about it. And now everyone's like, what do you mean you have a new project, you scammer? And it's like, it's just not, it's not the appropriate it's not an attitude that's conducive to growth.
No, for
That's
sure.
Really toxic culture. Yeah.
Right. And worse than that, they actually tried the toxicity. They like to them it's a badge of honor, and that's why, like, I'm like public enemy number 2, I think, for the maximalists. Probably after Roger. I think they hate me the most. Just like we're saying, like, it's sort of crazy to expect that you're gonna have one chain and one chain only forever. That doesn't make any.
Yeah, especially people that should understand subjective value and market innovation. But also part of it is definitely like the hodl mentality that comes into play. Like, they see a high price tag on Bitcoin, so it just gets into their mind like
crazy. That's even crazier to me, because most of these maximalists claim to be Austrians, which is a joke in and of itself. But if you actually read the Austrians, they all say, well, if you want to become money, you have to be a medium of exchange, and that's the primary function of money. And then once you become a medium of exchange, then a commodity can assume secondary functions like value storage and things like that. And they're just trying to jump the gun now. The reason why is because they can't. It's not an efficient medium of exchange. So to them, it's like, well, how do we satisfy the utility requirement of regression theorem without being a peer-to-peer cash? Oh, well, we have to be the answer is that we're a much better means of value storage than anything else. Insane to me to say something like this, and Bitcoin will 10x or it'll drop $3,000. To call that a store of value is just insane to me. A store of value is like, it implies a degree of stability, like gold or silver or something like that.
Yeah, we are very far from the store of value period of cryptocurrency, and to just ignore the fungibility aspect of money it's insane.
It doesn't make any sense to me. It doesn't make any sense whatsoever. And they're like, it's interesting because I don't even think that they understand the errors that they're making. So, like, if you think about it, really, there's two kinds of Bitcoin maximalists, right? There's I break them down into two schools of thought. There's the Dean Moose school of thought, which is, okay, these people accept regression theorem. They believe in regression theorem. So the problem for them is, how do we get around this utility requirement? And that's the whole store value thing. And that's wrong for the reasons I just said. The other school of thought sort of comes from Nick Szabo. And this is sort of even more ridiculous. Instead of saying, they reject regression theorem outright. Nick Szabo called me he called me a dogmatist once. He said I was dogmatic for believing in regression theorem. I said to him, okay, fine, Nick, I'm dogmatic for believing in regression theorem. Incumbent upon anyone who rejects regression theorem to explain the origins of money in a non-circular fashion, right? Because that's what, when regression theorem first came out, like, it was such an innovation because this problem in economics where they couldn't explain the initial value of money in a way that was non-circular. And this is what the Austrians were able to do. So by going all the way back and saying, yeah, but they were wrong, you're resuming this old problem in economics, and they don't have an answer for it. And if you ask them, they come up with some crazy shit about like seashells and dowry and nonsense, really. Really, it's just nonsense.
Anarcho-Keynesianism.
Really, really, truly, yeah.
Oh God!
I'm pretty sure I saw a bot tweet that on Twitter a few days ago. It's like an anarchist ideologies bot.
Oh yeah, that one. I love that bot.
I've seen that too, actually. Yeah.
Oh God, those bots that just tweet random shit. I follow a B movie generator bot, and I just love that one.
Well, speaking of tweets, that leads us to our next question, which I had for you. So I saw a tweet from you the other day, and it was in your opinion, your top 5 worst presidents. You had Bush Jr. on that list, but I was a little surprised to not see Bush Sr. on that list because, in my opinion, he's the worst president we've had since FDR. So I want to ask you, what, in your opinion, makes Bush Jr. worse in your eyes?
I'll tell you what, that was it was a hard list to come up with because there was so much competition for the worst president ever. They really are like awful, and everybody who commented was like, "Why don't you pick this guy?" I was like, "Well, that's a good point. That guy did suck too." Bush 1 was awful. I mean, the guy. These people should all be in a work camp, but Bush 1 was the wars and the economics, stuff like that. You're right. He was absolutely awful. He was probably even worse of an individual in his time at the CIA. He's responsible for a whole bunch of stuff, maybe even Kennedy's assassination. Certainly a lot of communication with Cuba. So yeah, I mean, I won't argue with you if you want to change Bush 2 and 1. A lot of people say I should have thrown Nixon in there. Nixon was awful. Nixon was another one who was awful. LBJ could have been on that list. Obama could have been on that list. At this point, it's basically you're just picking and choosing based on death count at this point. That's how bad they are.
Yeah. Top 45 worst presidents.
Right.
We should erect a statue of William Henry Harrison on his deathbed 31 days into his presidency.
Michael Mallett
didn't do anything too bad.
Well,
Michael Mallett would strangle you for that one, Porter.
I know, he hates that joke.
See, my reasoning for saying Bush number 1, in my opinion, the reason I think he's the worst we've had since FDR is because the people he brought in through his administration and the policies that were put in and the things we did, like going into the Middle East, the war on drugs escalated even more after Reagan. Police started to become militarized and stuff. That all started under Bush 1. I mean, not all of it was passed until after he left, but all of that was birthed because of his administration and his time there. Without him, I don't think the neoconservative takeover was really going to happen. But that goes back to not just his presidency. I think that happened with his vice presidency with Reagan, because Reagan was definitely just a puppet.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. Reagan probably was like the seed in that really kind of the whole inconsistent neoconservative movement, and then like you said, Bush 1 really kind of took it to another level. Bush 2 to me is just an awful person. Just anybody who can kill that amount of children really is just not okay with me.
No, and I'm with you. And I mean, I can't argue Bush 2 being worse either, because things like the Patriot Act, firearms restrictions,
Right.
the actions he took during Hurricane Katrina, the wars. I mean, they're both terrible.
I mean, this is the whole issue, though. I mean, like, they're not even close. None of these people are even close to being positive, right? They're so far negative. Like, but I subtweeted that tweet with the top 5 best presidents, the ones that were the least worst, and I put Harrison as like number 3 because I thought that the 2 above him were actually did good. They were probably the only 2 presidents who actually more good than bad, and then Harrison was neutral because he died right there, and then everybody after that was bad. So like even my they were bad presidents. They were just not as bad as the others. It's bad, I guess.
So who do you think is the least worst?
John Tyler. Tyler was probably the least worst president because it's like if you or I were elected president, right? It was almost like one of us. And if you go back and read like his vetoes and stuff, he's very like on the money. He's very like he interprets the Constitution as it's written. He's not going to pass works, things like that. A few presidents like this. We don't get too many of them anymore. Calvin Coolidge was number 2 because he genuinely did, I think, tried a little bit to push the country back in the right direction after the disaster that was Wilson. I think it was just trying to swim against the current. It's not going to happen. I put Harrison, and then get who I picked for like 4th and 5th. I think
did Jimmy Carter is one of them? Is he?
No, I think I picked Cleveland, and then
Jefferson was one, yeah.
Yeah, but it was only Jefferson's first term because Jefferson's second term was sort of a disaster. A lot of that comes from John McClanahan has a book called 9 Presidents Who Screwed Up America and 4 Who Tried to Help It. Also got a class online that I took a couple of years ago, Liberty Classroom, that he was actually giving away for free, where he goes over like all the presidents, and that's basically where I picked all stuff up.
We are not sponsored by Tom Woods. Just so the audience knows, but we wish we were.
Yeah.
I would have put Jimmy Carter as the best just because he fucked things up more than anything for the government. So I'll take that.
You know what? I'll tell you what. Jimmy Carter. You guys are going to hate me for saying this. I think he was actually not. He was underrated, and I'll give you 2 reasons for this. Number 1, Carter was the only president, I think off the top of my head, maybe other than Coolidge, who didn't fire a shot in the whole 20th century. The president sort of used the military in some way. Also, the other thing about Carter that I respect is that when he was the head of the Fed under Carter, jacked up interest rates to like 17, 18, 19%, something like crazy like that, which is what we should have done. It's the right thing to do. It's just that the politicians don't have the stomach for that anymore. Think that, whereas you see Trump today saying lower interest rates, I want to get reelected, lower interest rates. Back then, you had Carter who was like, do what you got to do. If it screws up my career, do whatever is best for the country. So I do give him a little bit of credit insofar as that goes, but although he was still a bad president.
Yeah, they all were. But as someone who enjoys whiskey and now there's a lot of smaller craft distilleries, I can thank Carter for that one because his deregulation of the food industry led to a lot of smaller businesses being able to come into the market.
It goes to show you how much things have changed when Democrats used to deregulate things.
Yes.
Yeah,
it's hard to imagine. I'm still thinking about the interest rate point. It's hard to imagine interest rates ever going above 5% again. much less
No.
almost 20%.
Oh,
Could you imagine 5% interest on what's the debt at now? Like,
it's 25,
I think it just crossed 28 million or 28 trillion. I mean,
5% interest rates
Jeez.
would if we had interest rates of 5%, that would exceed the entire tax collection. Like they wouldn't be able to do it. Eventually, the market,
Let's go.
the market will do it anyway. Eventually,
Mhm.
rates will turn to a market-based rate anyway. I think.
Oh, for sure. You can only keep it down for so long.
Exactly. It's like what we were saying earlier. You can't really fight the market.
Well, they're certainly trying their hardest.
No doubt.
All right. This is kind of unrelated, but to move on, I was very curious about this question because, like, now everyone knows about Samuel Edward Konkin's books, and even Community Technology by Carl Hess is getting some recognition. Alongside Night is a pretty commonly referenced one now. But what essays or books do you think don't get the recognition they deserve in the agorist anarchist space?
I think the most important writing, the post-Konkin period, is Per Byland's article, Strategy for Pushing Back, where he really, it's probably the best, even in the pre-Konkin era, it's really the best analysis of counter-economics that I know of. Per Byland, frankly, in my opinion, I think he's probably a genius, whether or not he'll admit it to you or not, but I think he probably is a genius. And I don't know if you guys have read this article or not, but from 2006, and he posted it on LouRockwell.com. He breaks down economics into vertical and horizontal strategies. The vertical strategy he attributes to Carl Hess and Community Technology, just creating local production facilities that bypass state regulations like aquaponics or 3D printers or blockchain miners. And the other half of this is the horizontal strategy, which comes more from Konkin, and that's just peer-to-peer exchange, unregulated exchange. And what he points out, the thing that I think is so already impressive, that he was able to categorize counter-economic activities like this, but then he points out that you combine the two of them, that's when you have the real strength of counter-economics. He wrote this in 2006. 2008, Satoshi Nakamoto writes the white paper. At what year? Ross did the Silk Road, and then we had Cody Wilson right after that, like sort of three things back to back to back, out with the Liberator. All three of those advancements realized the strategy that Per Byland spoke about in that article. Both combined vertical and horizontal counter-economics to get around the state. Really, if you think about it, probably the most important theoretician in the liberty movement today is Per Byland. Without him, who knows if we would even have these things. I'm not saying that Satoshi Nakamoto was perusing LouRockwell.com, wrote the white paper, but my point is that it sort of lays it all out for us, and it shows us, it gives us a blueprint to the pre-existing projects. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, you put that way better than I could have, but that article was actually going to be my answer to the question too. I'm a huge Per Byland fanboy, so yeah.
Same. There's also a couple other works of fiction and stuff like that in Agorism. There's a book called Anarchia that J. Neil Schulman told me about. I've never actually read it, but he's like, you got to read it. It's a great agorist sci-fi book that I believe Brad Lineweaver, who's another agorist, wrote. Also, Victor Coleman is a old school agorist from the Anarcho Village days. It's got a lot of writings and stuff like that.
I have a question. Would you agree that agorism is underrepresented in the cyberpunk genre?
What do you mean?
I just feel like the cyberpunk genre is occupied by a lot of economic leftists, when I think like it could be a genre that is rife for the message of agorism.
It is, no doubt. It's for sure. I think, and they asked Sam about this once. They asked him about the whole cyberpunk movement, and I think he hit it right in the head, hit the nail on the head. He said that no one counter-economic activity will suffice to bring about a state of freedom. All of the different activities combined will. Cyberpunk and crypto anarchism, that's certainly a piece of it. So are these, the street gremlins, the people, on the corner doing the dirty work. They're another part of it. People getting the message out there, getting the books, doing the theory. It's all, they're all pieces to the same puzzle. You know what I mean? Cyberpunks are definitely one piece of it, but if they don't understand economics, God bless. It doesn't matter. And, it goes back to what you were saying earlier. They could, whether or not they understand the theory behind it, is irrelevant, right? Like, I don't think Gandhi, obviously Gandhi didn't know what agorism was because Sam didn't come up with the theory before, but that's exactly what he did. He used counter-economics to get rid of the British Empire the same way any agorist would. I mean, frankly, it's the perfect application of counter-economics. So because they're not completely up to date on the theory doesn't mean that they're counter-economic. That doesn't mean that their activity isn't counter-economic.
Yeah. And that's a good answer, but I meant cyberpunk like the literary genre, like Neuromancer and Snow Crash and
right.
that sort of stuff.
No, think about like Ready Player One, Snow Crash. A lot of those books are sort of agorist, right? Like in Snow Crash, what is it? Uncle Enzo's Pizza and Nar Columbia. The cartel and the mafia who once the state was abolished, then they were subjected to market accountability and they had to start behaving. That's all, that's agorism.
I mean, I just want to say, while we're talking about fiction that kind of has agorism in it, one of my favorite shows that I liked even before I got into all this stuff was Trailer Park Boys. But ever since I've read about counter economics, every damn episode I watch of that show, I recognize that they participate in some kind of counter economics, and it does work for them to an extent. So I think that's a pretty good example we should put out there more.
They're certainly free in that show. Not oppressed by the cops. That's
no, not at all. Well, until they get arrested at the end of the seasons, but that's
right.
at the end of the season, so who cares?
All right. Well, Paul, you had one more question.
Did I?
Yeah. Memes.
Oh yeah. I didn't even see that down at the bottom of our list.
Oh well, we have one other question than that too.
I don't know, sorry. You want to go ahead? We got time. So.
I'll ask you because I was actually interested. Hold on, let me pull it up here.
Take your time. No rush.
Okay.
TikTok.
How do you see the fight for liberty evolving in the next decade? Like, what is going to be the change? And what, in your opinion, is there to be the most excited about? You may have answered that a bit, but a full whatever you have to say about that.
This is gonna sound very optimistic, probably a little bit too optimistic, maybe, but I don't think that the Fed can keep this game of musical chairs up forever, and I think that the bubble's popped. I don't think that they can reinflate this one. They're gonna try like hell, but I don't think it's gonna work. Be able to get away with it for a little while, but sooner than later, I think. In 10 years, it's notoriously difficult to time economic events, but I think that sooner than later, there's going to be a reckoning. And I don't think the general public, I don't think people in the liberty movement understand how serious of an event we have coming up. It's going to be a complete economic reset. I think we're living through the death of fiat currency, right? This is a relatively new experiment, this whole fiat currency crap. From Nixon on, but I think that it's going to end pretty soon. And when that comes, we're going to have a choice. Are we going to resort to communism or are we going to resort to liberty? And obviously, I've already made the choice. I use cryptocurrency. I use precious metals. But I think that the general public is going to have a choice to face. So, who knows which way they swing, but overall, I'm optimistic in the wouldn't say the near term, but I say the medium to long term. I'm optimistic.
Mm-hmm.
That time, I think they're going to get super oppressive in that time because they're going to do anything possible to try to, they're going to be grasping at straws to hold on to power. So that part will be ugly, and that's living through that right now, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think cash bans are what's next, and that's going to be rough.
Mm-hmm.
Right, and I think that's part of. I agree with you. I think that's part of the Federal Reserve's collapse because I said they're going to do anything possible to reinflate this bubble. I mean, they've already done what? We have infinite QE. Interest rates are as low as they can get. They've basically their toolbox is empty. So now they have to start getting creative, and I think that's what we're going to start to see next: is the death of cash. What we'll do is, and I fully expect to see this within the next 24 months tops. I think that they're going to issuing stimulus money. What they'll do is now they're going to do it with a digital currency. It'll be issued. You get a little notification on your phone. Ding! You just got $1,200 thanks to the president. And thing is, though, because it's going to be a digital currency. You're going to restrict how and where you can spend it. So you won't be able to go onto Coinbase, or you won't be able to go to the gun store. You won't be able to buy gold or silver. I want you to go to Target and Walmart and Applebee's. Need you to consume and spend and sort of keep up this game of musical chairs. But I agree with you. I think that the death of cash is certainly part of that, and we're going to see that pretty soon.
I do want to chime in here for a second since I haven't said anything all the whole time. What you said about like the digital currency thing being part of the stimulus checks. There's been quite a few people already getting like government mandated like stimulus credit cards with the $1,200 on it. I know my mom got one. I don't think she's spent any of it yet because she's like nervous about it because I've been like drilling into her head about all this stuff. So she hasn't spent any of it out of fear. But a lot of people have been getting those.
Right, no doubt.
It's scary.
No doubt. I think, like I said, though, I think next it's going to be the next phase of that is digital currency, and that's going to be so they can restrict where and how you spend it.
Well, what you said though about your optimistic view on this, I actually share that with you big time because I actually do see the very same thing happening. And not to whore myself out here, but I did write an article about this kind of earlier this last week. And it's funny because I'm not sure if you saw it, which I'm sure you did because you're on Twitter and everything. But in Lebanon, protesters actually burnt down their central bank because they are mad about how the Lebanese pound has depreciated so bad over there. Now, the Lebanese pound isn't gone, and their central bank, of course, will probably come back. But it shows before I go on, but also the citizens are using cryptocurrencies more. They're using hard commodities more to keep their value or spend or all their transactions, all that. But I'm curious to see how that will fold out because I also share your concerns. Like I could see the Lebanese government coming down on them stronger than they have even in the past, because the Lebanese government since the 80s has been totally oppressive of those people. So I can only imagine it will get worse since what's happened with their central bank.
Well, here, I mean, they've devalued the currency by more than 98% here. So I wish the people had that kind of heart where they could go burn down the Federal Reserve building. Rather than burning down the Target, go, I don't want to get myself in trouble here, but rather than burning down the Target, there's other places I would prefer for them to burn down.
Insurrection Inc. does not endorse these views.
Yeah, so you're on a show called Insurrection Inc., and we're already on somebody's watch list. What does it matter?
For sure. But yeah, no, 100%. I couldn't agree with you more. Also, Cyprus, which is right around the corner from Lebanon, went through that, in 2007, 2008. They woke up one day and guess what? The ATMs had a $50 limit. How do you pay your mortgage? How do you buy food? How do you raise your children? How do you live? And I think that's going to be the move from just Cyprus to the whole world pretty soon. That was just a little taste of what's to come. Foreshadowing,
Yeah.
And yet you're optimistic through all of this.
Hey, I'm with him. I'm with him.
I think at the end of that, it's like the best analogy for this is like being a drug addict, right? Everybody knows somebody who's had a problem with drugs because the government screwed that up too. So we all know somebody who's like battled with drug addiction. It's the same thing with the Federal Reserve, right? It's like if you're trying to get off of heroin, you have to go through this painful process of withdrawal. It's awful. You're sick and you just want to die or whatever. But at the other end of it, there's a light at the end of that tunnel, and you come out of it healthy, and then you could go back to living like a healthy, normal life. Same thing with the Federal Reserve. You have to go through that painful recession. The market has to liquidate. All that malinvestment has to get cleared out of the market. Everything that's been created with this counterfeit money, the market has to clear all that out. And like, think about how much has been created over the years. I mean, that's a huge, we're talking enormous depression that has to occur to liquidate all that malinvestment. According to Mises, that has to happen, and that will happen, and that happens every time. So that's the painful part. But if we can get through it, the other end of that, we can have a normal, healthy economy. It's just that the problem is the politicians. Once the addict starts to feel dope sick, the politicians just step in. Rather than going through withdrawals, they just give them another shot in the arm of easy money, and that's the problem, you know.
Yeah.
All right, we have a few lighthearted questions to end on. My first one is: do you think the red rapist or the blue rapist will win in November?
I think it all goes back to the Fed. I think it goes how long they can keep up their game. If they can keep it up until after the election, Trump will win. If there's problems before then it could flip. Like if we go through a deep recession in August, September, and he could have a problem. I just can't see how anybody. I can't see how these debates are going to go. I can't see these people putting Biden on a debate stage. The man can't complete a sentence. So I don't see how they're going to put him on a debate stage and then also get people to vote for him. And it's definitely going to be interesting.
It's going to be free entertainment for the Agorists.
It's going to be great for the memers.
We're already loving the current election.
It's beautiful, like a train wreck.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Speaking of which, do you have a favorite meme of 2020 so far?
Oh man, I don't know. So many of them. You know what? They come and go like so quickly.
It's been a busy year.
It is. It would be hard for me to pin one down. Favorite meme of all time, though, and I think this is from last year and not this year, is of course Epstein didn't kill himself. You can do so much with it, and it works all the time, no matter what. That's the best meme ever. I still use it to this day. I don't care. I will post.
I see you post
the day
those.
I die.
Oh, that one just started. It was like a drill in my head. It was just like, oh man, it's not even because of the message. It was just like, I think just because the people sharing it that drove me insane. Like the same reason I hate like woke social media posts from people that never care. It just drives me crazy.
You know, the thing is, like, I don't know if like you guys like people forget, even though this was just it was recent memory, but people forget he went to jail. Everyone's like, he's gonna get suicided.
Yeah.
The next day, it was like, oh, he made a suicide attempt. Everyone's like, what are you talking about? We told you guys this is gonna happen. And the next day, it was like, okay, yeah, now there's another suicide attempt, and it really happened. You know, the guards got called off of their shift, and the lights went out, the cameras went out. It's like something out of like a Bugs Bunny cartoon. And it's like, and that's why I think the memers, like collectively, it was just like, we're not gonna let anybody ever forget about this.
I think you just pinpointed who did the murder.
Right.
Oh god damn.
The bright side of that was that like the entire nation was in on a conspiracy theory for once. It wasn't just the crazy people, quote unquote. It was like everyone knew he didn't commit suicide. But the same people who still repost Epstein didn't kill himself memes every once in a while are the ones who are going to go vote for Joe Biden or Donald Trump.
No, I know. That's the sad thing to me is that they understand what's going on, or at least they claim to understand what's going on, and they still will engage in this behavior. That's just, it's literally, I mean, I'm not a psychologist, but from pop culture, they say that the definition of insanity is to do the same thing over and over again. It's exactly what these idiots are going to do in a few months.
It reminds me of my personal favorite meme, which is the NPC meme from last year. That was the best.
I love that one.
We still use that one.
It's so viable. It is so fucking viable. Yeah. As memes, they are such powerful weapons, and I love them so much.
I wrote an article a while back called "The Art of Mimetic Warfare," and when I researched that article, I was shocked to find out that the military actually has paid meme lords. You and I are paying people to meme for the army and for the government. Just,
what the fuck?
I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. I think though, what I say in the article is that that's fine. They can do that because it doesn't matter. A good meme is based on logic. It's a like I was saying earlier. A meme is just an argument in a picture format in a JPEG. So they don't have an argument. They have no logic. So that's why people say the left can't meme. Really, just it goes to show again from another angle what we were talking earlier about how the agora is inevitable. Eventually, we're going to win. Just goes to show you that look at the meme war. It's so one-sided, right? It's so one-sided.
It really is. It's like a communist meme is just the picture and then just a full-on paragraph out of the bread book.
No one wants to read that shit.
No. Who wants to be lectured in a fucking meme?
Even from our side, and even a meme from our side, if it has too much text, I just go right past it.
Yeah. And something funny that happened today, talking about Marxists and leftists and how they spread their ideas. We saw one on Twitter today, and he said slavery was a necessary institution or something like that. Whatever. But we fucked with him. But the funniest part to me was another Marxist gets on there and they start getting into an argument about the interpretation of Marxist writings. And when I read that shit in my head, all I could think is, of course you guys are going to argue about this because it's so fucking confusing. It's so convoluted and it's so loaded. And Marxism, it's just so fucking dumb. And we went through the other guy's post, and oh my god, of course they were all so fucking dumb and full of information you could care less about.
And Stratty's response was the best.
Marx's writing is so like you said, so convoluted and ambiguous that you can't even really draw any strong conclusions from it. So that's why I think like communists fight amongst themselves, but they always obviously they have to fall back on concentration camps because you can't take a man's paycheck voluntarily. So that's what they always fall back to the camp. But it's a big joke. I saw the one guy said the other day that you guys probably saw it. It went viral. He said something like, "Was it Lenin wasn't a slave owner, you idiots," or something like that?
Yeah, comparing him to George Washington, right?
Yeah, that's what it was.
Fuck existential comics. That is the most annoying page.
Dude, the guy killed 150 million. Who cares if he owned a slave at that point?
And what's funnier even about like people in that 150 million were other Marxists. Now they make fun of us, and they call libertarians. They make fun of us for our infighting because we, amongst our different factions, at least we're not fucking killing each other. But like holy shit, our infighting isn't that bad.
Like our discussions, and it's like more like philosophical like inquiries. Like, well, how does the map apply in this situation? To them, it's like, should they execute him or should he just go to the gulag for 20 years?
Yeah.
Like, that's the extent of the range of debate.
I love him. Andrew, you wanted to jump in?
Yeah, it has nothing to really do with what y'all were talking about, but I just wanted to say something cool. My dad, who's very against everything that I believe in, which would be a lot of this stuff, obviously. I just got off the phone with him, and I had to explain to him who we were interviewing, And then I had to explain, like, give him a quick 30-second explanation of agorism, and I'm pretty sure I got him on the page of it.
Let's
Like,
go.
Republican or
Republican.
okay?
Like when he heard libertarian, when I told him I was a libertarian like months and months ago, he was a little iffy on it because he just didn't know what that meant. And then of course I come out like 2 or 3 weeks later saying I'm an ANCAP, and then he was like, "Oh." And now he compares me to your everyday liberal, thinking that I want everything given to me and want none of the work for some reason, despite capitalist being the second half of the word.
Hey, at
All
least
right,
your dad
Andrew,
doesn't
therapy
contribute to
session
ISIS.
after this, but
Yeah, Andrew, we'll go into a private call. I can be your therapist for an hour.
I don't need a therapist.
At this point, I basically I've gotten to the point where I just tell my family that they're all socialists and not to speak to me about politics.
I just try to
Basically,
avoid it the
I'm out
best
with my
I can.
family at this point.
Oh man, but this has been a really good episode. I think we're running up on the end here. So, is there anything you would like to plug, Sal?
I think everybody, follow me on Twitter at Sally Mayweather. Check out saltheagorist.com, and we really have everything over on my site, so you can find everything. I sell T-shirts, got my blog, podcast. It's all over there. So that's saltheagorist.com.
All right, perfect.
Yeah.
Thanks for coming on, man. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for having me, guys. Let's do it again.
Hell yeah.
Would love to.
All right. Have a great day, everybody.